The crimson sunset slants across the pavement when the officer's voice cuts through with dripping disdain. Navy SEAL? Or just playing dress-up? His words aren't just a challenge, they're a blade aimed straight at her pride. He yanks her military ID from her hand and tosses back a mocking smirk as if it were a toy. Surrounded by silent witnesses, her isolation only underscores the raw racism on display. Then, with a single, masterful flick of her wrist, she makes his gun tremble, laying bare his hatred. This lightning-quick move will leave you breathless. Real strength isn't in the muzzle of a weapon, but in unshakable conviction. To see how she flips the script, exposes blatant biais, and watches justice unfold. Smash, subscribe, and hit the bell now. On a sun-scorched Louisiana street, the air thick with the smell of fried fish and the distant laughter of children, a patrol car's engine revved and shattered the calm. She stepped off the city bus with unshakable poise-dark eyes, like storm clouds, each footfall etching discipline into the pavement. It was her first return in 7 years to this very place. The same streets that had witnessed her mother's funeral under that silent sun. Back then, she didn't yet understand the price of life and death. Now her homecoming carried painful memories and a strength forged in the deserts of Kandahar, through the sandstorms of Fallujah, and sleepless nights beside fallen comrades. Everything else remained frozen in time. The corner convenience store still wore its faded sign. The old barbershop still advertised $15 haircuts. And the community basketball court still rang with the thud of balls on worn asphalt. That familiar scent of fried fish no longer felt like comfort, it tasted like memory reclaimed. Under the pale sunlight, past and present seemed to collapse into one, as though the world itself was holding its breath for what would come. Behind the slung brown duffel bag lay dusty uniforms and tarnished medals. Relics of a warrior returned. She inhaled deeply, drowning out the hum of traffic, the echo of distant conflict, and the ever-present ache of loss. Across the street, a group of teens huddled outside a diner reminded her of the young recruits she once led, and the words still ringing in her mind, "Maintain your warrior's stance." On this unforgiving street, weakness wasn't an option and she had none left. Then, a soft siren cried from the parked patrol car. The window rolled down to reveal an officer's gaze, hard, contemptuous, confident in his undisputed authority. A jolt ran through her arm. Every combat mission, every brutal training hour had led to this hometown confrontation. This was no routine ID check, it was a test of dignity. He had no idea he was about to face someone who'd endured betrayal and honed herself to never flinch before injustice. In that instant, the sunlight turned toxic, daring her to step forward and answer his contempt with the unwavering stance of a true warrior. Immediately after that first moment of confrontation, she paused beneath the rare canopy of shade on the deserted street, silently recalling the journey she'd endured. 7 years ago, in this very spot, she had quietly bid farewell to her mother, the only woman in her life who ever brought tears to her hardened cheeks before trading her civilian clothes for the solemn uniform. From that funeral to the brutal battlefields, she carried in her heart the faces of comrades who'd fallen and the perpetual echo of gunfire. She had led her unit across Kandahar where sandstorms swallowed every sound through Fallujah, rife with ambush, and into Mogadishu, where darkness devoured all landmarks, every courtyard, every dented armored vehicle, every photograph of teammates laughing before a mission helped forge her into the unbreakable soldier she became. Those years had taught her the law of survival. Decide instantly. Never hesitate. And always be ready to face death. Her eyes, dark as black coffee, reflected the invisible scars of her soul. The smell of gunpowder, the shriek of nighttime sirens, and the tightening of her heart whenever a comrade's name crackled over the radio still haunted her whenever the city fell silent. Each step on foreign soil tempered her resolve. Even when exhaustion threatened to consume her, she learned to steady her voice, to call each teammate by name, and to catch them when they fell. Now, returning to her old neighborhood, the echoes of the past still pulsed beneath the pavement. Locals watched her with wary curiosity, a woman of color whose measured stride spoke louder than any uniform. When a boy darted forward and asked, "Are you a veteran?" she offered a gentle smile and a nod. His astonished look revealed both admiration and surprise at the quiet strength she exuded. Gathering her worn duffel and her unspoken resolve, she continued on, ready for whatever lay ahead. She knew that no enemy on the battlefield could be as formidable as the biases she faced here. Nothing can defeat someone who refuses to flinch, she reminded herself, pressing forward under the salt-tinged glow of the afternoon sun, hopeful that one day true peace would finally arrive. Stepping past the last canopy of trees at the end of the street, she immediately sensed a shift in the air, the low growl of a patrol car rolling slowly behind her. She didn't turn around. Yet every nerve signaled danger-like, being surrounded by enemies in a barren desert. The car door opened, and a man in his 40s, rugged-faced and crisp in uniform, emerged. His eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses, a rough voice cut through the stillness. "Ma'am, could you come here for a moment?" She halted, lifted her chin slightly, and kept a safe distance. "How can I help you?" she asked, her tone calm but not submissive. He narrowed his eyes, irritation clear on his face. "Let me see some ID and a black woman walking alone on a deserted street. Isn't that a bit unusual?" His words dripped with sarcasm and blatant racial prejudice. Without flinching, she reached into her back pocket and pulled out her military ID, clearly showing her name and rank. "Here," she said, holding it out. He snatched it roughly, turning it over in his hand like a trophy. "Former Navy SEAL." "Huh? You planning to intimidate me?" he sneered, mocking her service. She took a deep breath but kept her composure. "You can verify it if you want," she replied evenly. "It's real." He didn't want the truth, he wanted a confrontation. Around them, bystanders posed. A teenager raised his phone to record. He barked. "Turn that camera off," she offered a faint smile. "I'm not hiding anything, but you have no right to confiscate my property." The air thickened, tension rippling through every heartbeat. As he reached toward her hip, aiming to search her, she reacted with lightning precision. One hand locked his wrist and stepped back, unbalancing him. "Hands off me," she said quietly, her voice carrying the authority of command. Passersby erupted in protest. "Let her go." In an instant, he was surrounded by angry stares and shouted demands. This wasn't a routine ID check, it was a moment when she forced the entire neighborhood to confront their own biases and respect her dignity. Under the fading sunlight and the aroma of fried fish, she stood tall and unbowed, ready for whatever came next. The late afternoon sun was beginning to fade when the officer approached, barely a few paces from her, his voice rough and urgent in the tense air. "Show me your ID now." She calmly drew her U.S. Marine Corps ID from her shirt pocket, holding it like an invisible weapon. That simple gesture made the officer snatch it with a triumphant gleam in his eye. "Marine SEAL. Who? Well, a fake one could pass for the real thing," he sneered, flicking the card between his fingers like spoils of war. She didn't lose her composure. Her expression remained softly smiling, her gaze icy as steel. "Feel free to verify it at headquarters. You'll soon know whether it's real or not." His eyes narrowed, lips curling in irritation. Clearly, he didn't want the truth to undermine the authority he was desperately trying to maintain. Passersby began to stop, The crowd's murmurs rose above the ambient sounds of rustling leaves and distant car horns. A young woman casually raised her phone to record, excitement lighting her face. The officer snapped his head toward her. Voice sharp, "What are you filming? Delete that right now." But she said nothing, only kept recording. Her determination unshaken. The balance of pressure began to shift from her to him. Usually he held the upper hand. But now, surrounded by witnesses and cameras, his brute authority started to wobble. He furrowed his brow, attempting to reclaim control. "Don't think that standing alone in the street gives you the right to challenge the law." She nodded gently, not a hint of fear in her voice. "I understand your duty. But checking someone's ID must follow procedure. You're violating my rights by holding it without explanation." His face drained of confidence, replaced by unease. The surrounding onlookers' curiosity ripened into outrage. An elderly man muttered, "Make her aware of her rights." A young backpacker stepped closer and whispered, "Has he done anything wrong?" She merely smiled and shook her head. "Not yet." "Oh." He inhaled deeply, forcing himself to sound firm. "Fine. I'll call for verification. Stay here." He then grabbed his radio and keyed the mic to headquarters. She exhaled softly, glancing up at the dimming sky as if she'd already anticipated this outcome. Through distant speakers, the neighborhood announcement crackled. Yet on this street corner, civilian justice was reclaiming its balance. Under the street lamp's imminent glow, she stood tall, meeting the officer's gaze without flinching. The crowd continued to record and whisper all in her favor. The ID card remained in her hand, both proof and emblem of acknowledged authority. What seemed like a routine ID check had become proof of the power of legal awareness and personal courage. She had defended not only her own honor, but reminded every uniformed officer that true authority resides not in one's firearm, but in one's respect for human rights. At the peak of tension, the neighborhood residents suddenly closed ranks into an unyielding wall, forming an invisible buffer between them and the patrol car. Not a single shout or accusation was uttered. Evenly, dozens of eyes fixed on the officer as phones continued to film his menacing stance. Curiosity gave way to quiet solidarity, small nods, souple glance, as if to say, "We're on her side." No. The officer waved his arm and barked, each word edged with anger. "Stop filming. Do you want to go to jail?" But all he received in return was steadfast silence. She offered a gentle smile and, with calm confidence, replied, "I've done nothing wrong." The crowd's silence became an impenetrable barrier, halting his every advance. In the eerie stillness, the crackling voice on his radio cut through like a plea for escape, requesting urgent backup at Main and 5th. The brief, beep-beep crackle filled the air, but could not sway the witnesses. They didn't need to shout by, refusing to support him. They had already stripped him of his power. His authority, built on intimidation, collided head-on with the collective strength of the community, a force no weapon could overcome. A weathered, middle-aged man stepped forward, gently resting his hand on her shoulder. "Thank you for showing us what real courage looks like," he whispered. She simply nodded. Wanting no fuss, an elderly woman from the back of the crowd shuffled forward, eyes brimming with hope, and softly asked the officer, "Are you sure you're in the right?" He fell silent, hesitating as he scanned the faces around him. There was no ally in sight. Now silence was no void. It spoke louder than any words. It exposed his abuse of power and laid bare his intent to bully. The onlookers once again reminded one another to remain calm, preserving order and mutual respect. Finally realizing he had no choice, the officer retreated his hand and dropped her ID onto the pavement with a hollow thud. "Oh." She bent to retrieve it, casting him a look of quiet empathy tinged with resolve. "Please follow proper procedure." No further threats were needed. This community had already contained his crude authority. upholding respect and justice. In that instant, no one applauded. The entire block seemed to inhale deeply, releasing a collective breath of relief and solidarity. 1 second of silence had defeated a weapon aimed at dividing and demeaning them. It was a testament to the power of unity and the force of responsible silence. Suddenly, a sharp beep rang out from beneath the armchair, slicing through the tension like an arrow. Every eye snapped toward the sound, even the officer's stance faltered as if struck. In one fluid motion, a security staffer bent down and retrieved a small clandestine transmitter, pitch black, no larger than a matchbox, its tiny red light still blinking. A collective gasp rose. She'd been monitored all along. Every step and word scripted by unseen hands. No sooner had the device been raised than its speaker crackled to life with a cold, mechanical voice. If he appears, he will act. Stand still and let the tension consume him. Oh, that detached directive laid bare a meticulously planned ambush. This wasn't a routine check-it, was a dirty trick aimed at humiliating a confident black woman in front of her community. Enraged, the officer clenched his radio and bellowed, "This is a filthy setup. You've all conspired to frame me." But his outburst only underscored the truth everyone had just uncovered. A team of young soldiers, those who had seen her power firsthand, stepped forward, flanking him. Nearby onlookers closed in too, forming an invisible wall of solidarity. In a heartbeat, a corporal tapped his comrade on the shoulder, signaling the move. Like clockwork, 2 soldiers reached out. One yanked the service pistol from the officer's holster. The other pried the radio from his grip. Metal clashed against concrete with a harsh clang as the gun clattered to the pavement. The radio tumbled after, buttons and antenna flying. That single metallic crash sounded like a drumbeat of justice, ripping away the veneer of his false authority. A swift, practiced wristlock followed, hammering shut every avenue of resistance. The officer's weapon was gone, his threat neutralized in an instant. No commands, needed just one discreet beep had rallied everyone to act. Faces in the crowd shifted from shock to quiet triumph. No cheers erupted, no orders were shouted. The message had been delivered. When a community unites and remains vigilant, no trap can succeed. The transmitter's final beep faded, but its lesson echoed on. A pistol and a radio proved meaningless against the power of transparency and collective resolve. As the handcuffs clicked into place and the officer bowed his head in shame, it was clear that true authority lies not in fear or force, but in the shared courage to expose wrongdoing and stand together. The moment the gun clattered to the pavement, a bystander had already hit record on their phone, capturing every terrifying second. Overnight, that 11-second clip spread at lightning speed. The draw, the 2 aggressive steps forward, the shouted challenge, and then the swift disarmament. By dawn, every major news network was replaying the footage, labeling it an internal declaration of war to underscore how grave the incident was. On Facebook, Twitter, and TikTok, the hashtags "abuse of power" and "humiliating a high-rank officer" trended worldwide. People shared not only in shock at seeing an officer so callously threaten a civilian's life, but also because the raw footage laid bare the racial prejudice at the heart of the encounter. Comment sections overflowed with accusations of inhumane conduct and assault on dignity. A prominent YouTuber called it the most disgusting display of dirty power in local law enforcement history. For the first time, America had to face a new truth. Silence in the face of danger can itself be the greatest show of strength. The image of a single woman standing perfectly still, her gaze steady, her calm composed against the fury of a badge-wielding aggressor, changed how the public understood authority. Viewers praised her courage, even with a barrel pointed at her. She never flinched. And That moment reminds us that discipline and honor are stronger than any gun. No, it wasn't just social media users speaking out. Security and human rights experts weighed in on national talk shows. One commentator declared, "This isn't merely a procedural violation, it's a cultural tragedy. A breach of trust between police and the communities they serve." Panel discussions dissected the root causes. From recruitment and training to internal oversight, NGOs issued urgent calls for comprehensive investigations and demanded that law enforcement agencies retrain their entire personnel to root out racial bias. Meanwhile, support for the woman in the video swelled into street demonstrations in major cities. Protesters carried signs reading, "Silence is our weapon," and "End abuse of power now." They didn't chant or clash with police, they simply stood, holding blank, white placards, visual echoes of her stillness. That sight made it impossible for officials to ignore the message. When power is abused, people have the right to push back, not with violence, but with collective, resolute silence. Never before had a few seconds of video wielded such influence. Those 11 seconds exposed the cruelty of prejudice and forced a nation to reassess how its laws are enforced. Public consensus emerged, in spaces of solemnity and honor. No badge or order can drown out the voice of conscience. The power of silence has become an undeniable symbol, reminding every officer and citizen alike, if you want real authority, you must first protect your integrity. 6 months have passed since that 11-second video shook the nation, and the city's atmosphere has shifted dramatically. Where once the streets of Baton Rouge lay quiet, banners now hang at every intersection and outside every precinct. Grant Protocol. Do not raise your finger in reverence. A new law governing ceremonies and sacred spaces strictly forbidding drawing firearms unless lives are at risk has been ratified and integrated into training curricula for more than 80% of coastal officers. They no longer assume authority comes from a barrel. Instead, they learn to hold fast to integrity as an ethical credential. But the deepest change has rippled through ordinary citizens. The young woman who recorded the video is no longer anonymous. Charles, a 19-year-old journalism student, now serves as a youth advisor on a community policing initiative. She teaches officers how to communicate respectfully with residents, transforming bystanders into watchful allies who help root out racial bias in the system. Meanwhile, the officer who drew his weapon awaits his ethics board hearing, though spared criminal charges. He has been demoted, stripped of allowances, and mandated to complete unconditional conduct training. Each time he passes the disciplinary office, the shame is palpably glares at the very phrase he once mocked, "Finger on the trigger." Local government has also launched regular listen and respect town halls, drawing hundreds of citizens, officers, and officials. Scroll through Baton Rouge social media these days, and you'll find the hashtag Silence Becomes Strength, accompanied by stories of young recruits crediting the incident with teaching them what true power means. As for the woman whose stillness before the muzzle made history, she continues her path, opening self-defense classes for women, emphasizing that real strength begins with calm and understanding. When asked what's next, she only smiles and replies, "It's time to amplify the community's voice, not just through video, but through actions that transform lives." So it is that 6 months later, the waves have not subsided, but carried change into the heart of every corner. From police barracks and students' dorms to the fried fish stand on the corner, silence did not die, it grew, pulling justice and compassion in its wake. Are you ready to join the wave? Share your thoughts in the comments below. A full year has passed since the confrontation that ignited a national reckoning, and what once was shock has become standard. The Grant Protocol now appears in every state's use of force manual: zero tolerance for raising a weapon during ceremonial events or routine stops. Body cam footage is reviewed not only for lawfulness but for context. Did the officer choose silence over aggression? departments report a 35% drop in misuse of force complaints, and community police trust indices have climbed to their highest levels in over a decade. Across Baton Rouge, precincts display plaques bearing the protocol's core maxim: true authority rests in restraint, not in the barrel of a gun. Recruit classes start every week with the 11-second clip no commentary allowed. Cadets sit in silence, eyes fixed on the screen, learning that courage can be still. Senior instructors have redesigned drills. Trainees practice calibrated pause before action. Verbal de-escalation exercises now outnumber firearms drills by 2 to 1. Meanwhile, Charles's community policing initiative has blossomed into a statewide program. She leads quarterly silent patrols, pairing officers with neighborhood volunteers. Together they walk downtown corridors, not to enforce, but to engage, exchanging phone numbers, sharing coffee, listening without judgment. Feedback surveys show residents feel 60% safer speaking out against bias, and 75% of officers credit these patrols with deepening their empathy. The former officer who once pointed his revolver at that quiet figure has become a case study in reform. After completing her mandated training, he now lectures rookie classes on the dangers of unchecked power. His demotion remains permanent. Today he wears a silver-edged stripe that signifies ethics mentor, and he carries no weapon. His personal journey from brinkmanship to advocacy underscores the protocol's promise. Accountability can forge leaders. Legislators across party lines have introduced the Ceremonial Conduct Act, extending the grant protocol's principles to federal events, diplomatic receptions, judicial inaugurations, and memorial dedications must now proceed weapon-free unless under direct threat. The act passed unanimously, a rare moment of unity born from a single, frozen moment of restraint. At the heart of this transformation remains the woman whose unflinching calm launched the movement. She now heads a nonprofit dedicated to civil courage, offering workshops nationwide that teach individuals how to stand firm without resorting to force. When asked how she feels 1 year on, she replies simply, "Silence can't be ordered, but it can be chosen." And when it is, it becomes the loudest call for justice. Oh, a year later, the streets once fractured by fear focus instead on dialogue. From officer in training to city council, the message is clear. Real power lies not in pulling triggers, but in holding them back. The legacy endures, not as a moment of spectacle, but as a sustained commitment to the belief that the greatest strength is found in restraint. From this story, we learn that true strength does not come from a gun barrel or shouted orders, but from the ability to remain calm and uphold the values of discipline and honor when facing prejudice and violence. Silence is not cowardice, but the highest declaration of authority. If placed in the role of the unwavering figure beside the casket, I would continue to spread the message of restraint, organize workshops on the art of silence for both public officers and the community, and initiate forums sharing strategies to confront racial bias. I would build support networks for victims and advocate policy reforms to introduce early education on respect and inclusion from elementary school. As for whether racial discrimination will be completely eradicated by 2050, the journey remains long and arduous, yet each steadfast act, a word spoken, a chosen moment of silence, a lesson taught helps close the divide of skin color, belief, and rights. If each person dares to self-reflect, to listen, and to show mutual respect, then by 2050, we might achieve a society where every uniform and every voice is judged by character, not by race.